So I think I want to kick this one off. I kind of want to jump in and
Okay,
just
sure.
go and swim because I was having this maybe 2 weekends ago, not this past weekend, but the one before because I wasn't feeling good. And I was having lunch with a friend, brunch with a friend. I won't say their name, but we were talking about kind of the market
Mm-hmm.
and what it looks like. And what she was saying is a lot of people who were laid off or unemployed were reaching out to her, right? And she goes, oh, yeah, I was just deny. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean? She goes, well, yeah, those are the people that, weren't doing well and not performing. And I was like, wait, hold on a second. Because yes, I was just like, you should have seen my face and my eyes. I was like, are
This
you
person a
kidding me
recruiter?
right now?
Person's a recruiter?
Well, no, over recruiting
Oh,
is what
okay.
I'll say. Yeah. So like a leader in the industry. So, or not in staffing, but well, yeah, in staffing.
Scary.
So anyways, yeah. So it had transitioned to a different job, things like that. But over the TA function has been a part of the TA function, has been a part of, what business conditions look like and things like that. So I said, really? I said, that's not true. Business conditions, when they go down, you can't keep as many people employed. And as a leader myself, I've had to lay off people who are amazing. That hurt. It hurt my heart to have to make these downsizes and cuts. So in some instances, yeah, companies go through and they say, who's your bottom performers? And they remove those people. And those are the people that are selected. But in everyday business conditions, it's typically going to be a mix of everyone based on the function that you need to reduce and based on the function that needs to happen. So I looked at her and I said,
sort of a ambiguous role who can do a lot of things might get taken because their salary's too high, and their salary maybe can cover two other people. So instead of laying off two
yes,
people, they just lay off the one, or there's tenure
right.
involved,
Yeah, tenure comes into play. You might not even you might have been a top performer, but you've only been there for 2 months, 3 months, a year. And there's someone that has been there for 5 years or even 3 years
Right.
that is not selected
Or
just because of
30
length of
years
time.
or
So
20 years. Yeah.
yeah, it just depends on what is the company's formula and methodology. And you never really know what that looks like. I would say from an outsider looking in, you don't know. Companies have created this narrative that say, we're laying off our bottom performers. You've seen it in other places and things like
Well,
that,
Mark
which
Zuckerberg said
completely,
about Meta, which is so awful. We're going to lay off all the low performing people. Why are you saying that? Just to like knock them out on the way out? Like not only are they losing their job, but you're saying they're low performers compared to what? I
yeah,
mean, if you're laying off thousands of people, come on. Like, how do you even say they're low performers? They can all be, you know?
agree. And performance based on what is the other question, because some roles are not even metriced in the same way. They're
Right.
not looked at in the same way.
My last role.
They add values in different ways.
Yeah.
Right. When I think about, have you ever watched Suits? Have you ever watched the show Suits?
No, I know we talked about this, and I'm so
Have to watch this. She creates this algorithm because no one wants to fire anybody, right? Or no one wants to let anybody go or let go of the bottom performers or things like that. And they don't know how to do it, or how do you even assess that in legal? So it's based on legal. And she creates this algorithm and she comes up with this guy that she is going to lay off or let go based on his performance. But based on his actions and all the things that he does and how he spends time in ensuring quality work, helping others with cases, helping other people mentor and grow them, that's why he explains in this episode why his metrics are lower than everyone else. He's like, this is the value I add. This is why I'm showing up on the list, but I do all of these things to add value. And she had to reconsider that, and she knew her algorithm was broken.
Perfect sense. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It was completely.
Yeah, years ago, I'll use this as an example. Years ago, I was working in retail and I was in a commission sales role. Okay. And they were switching some of the departments to not be commission and to be straight pay, straight hourly wage. And your wage was going to be determined by how long you'd been with the company and certain factors, right? And so when I found out about this, I hadn't been there that long. I'd been there maybe a year, but I was one of the top salespeople. But because I hadn't been there that long, my hourly wage was going to be low compared to what I was bringing in on my commission. And so I was like, I don't agree with this. I don't like this. And I want to be moved to one of the couple departments that was still going to have commission. And they were like, oh, but, and they followed me. And so they went and ran a report to show how I compared. And the leadership was shocked. They were like, we had no idea that she was making this much money and that she was performing this highly. And so they switched and they made my hourly rate a lot higher comparatively. But that's an example of that where I hadn't been there that long and they didn't know, but they were going to base it on, sort of this preordained sort of criteria and I was like, no, I mean, I could have just sat back and like, okay, well, I guess that's what it is. I'm leaving then if you're going to do that.
Yeah.
That's not right. And they were like, oh no, we don't want her to leave. She's making us too much money. So anyway.
Yeah, it was kind of a oops moment based on the evaluation.
Right. And then there was people who worked there who weren't going to get paid as much, who had been there longer and they were mad. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. I was just making a lot of money in sales. And if they want to switch it, but I had some people who were mad about that because I hadn't been there as long. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I'm not trying to throw it in your face, but like, that's just what it was. And the company ultimately made the decision. So otherwise like I said, I would have left.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, when I think about that and I think about that conversation we had, I love her to death. Like one of my favorite people in this entire, it just shocked me. And then she was like, I'm just kidding. So, all right, I'll just preface it with that. Like it was I don't know. I don't know. It didn't feel like it at the time, but I said, wait, hold on. You were actually just laid off before this role. So you mean to tell me you're a bottom performer? And she looks at me and was like, yeah, I don't perform. And I'm like, well, yeah, I know you do.
But
so that's just the whole thought process does not make sense at all.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense.
No. But you're right, though, that there is that conception, that perception out there that, if you were laid off, you must, but there's so many reasons. I've been laid off a number of times. And, I use that one as an example. I would have probably quit, but there's been times where companies had like lost a bunch of clients and they almost couldn't afford to keep the lights on. So your position is put out there to pasture. But, there's a lot of different reasons why. And sometimes it's become the norm, it seems like, to let staff go in order to make the bottom line look better. Companies can get tax breaks for paying people out, for different things. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of different reasons why companies make layoffs happen. For different reasons.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the closest, I've been fortunate to not have been laid off. I feel very fortunate because I've been through some different things in economies that were really scary. If you think about 2008, that was a point in time I'm like, oh, am I still going to have a job? I was really worried about that. But we did have to take a pay cut as leadership. I think it was a 20% pay cut, if I'm remembering right, which was pretty significant in the whole scheme.
We had to take some unpaid time off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember that. Like we had to dock like 10 hours a week or like 1 or 2 days a month I can't remember exactly what it was, but I do remember there was some unpaid time off that had to happen.
Yeah. And it was like based on your level and your salary and your pay, what you had to do to keep the organization right-sized so they didn't have to and still people were laid off. It didn't matter, right? Yeah. But it minimized the impact of how many people were laid off. And then even recently, when I think about COVID and leading that team and having to lay off people, which was very minimal. Like, remember, we were able to redeploy to other places and say, we need help here, and there's volume coming in from here based on what was happening in the environment. So we just moved people from one business to the other business that were willing and able to learn and things of that nature. And some people, they maybe said, no, I don't want to do that. I wouldn't be great at that. So they had the choice to either be laid off and not work until business came back, or, they could go and be deployed to somewhere else. So you try to, if a business is shifting internally, which luckily, in that situation, in that instance, we had one go up in volume while the others were dwindling in volume because we had the contingent side and travel versus, the full-time hiring side because no one was really hiring. They needed a bunch of the travel and things like that. So we were able to shift and ebb and flow. But that's not always the case. And it's not always, when you think about who's getting laid off, the majority of the time, I'll even say the majority of the time, it's business condition. It is not the lowest performer. And then when you start to look from an HR perspective, length of time and role, performance, if it's not completely metric, if you don't have the metrics that you can stand on all 10 toes on,
generating role,
you're going with the lowest seniority.
right?
Right? When you think about how long length of time that someone has been there in role, are you revenue generating? Are you non-revenue generating? Because you typically go with your non-revenue generating roles. And there are some roles that are revenue generating that are not considered
Right.
non-revenue. You know, like when you think about how businesses classify, because I always think about recruiters as revenue generating. Not all people think like that. I think about sales, revenue generating. That's an easy one. Most people consider sales a revenue generating. But still, if you have a market where you can't go out and really sell based on the condition, you're going to have to reduce the amount of salespeople you have or the amount of recruiters you have. So it really depends. And then some people would consider, if I think about staffing in that world, your people on site that are managing the client, they're doing a lot of administrative. So are they revenue generating or are they not? When you put them in that bucket, you can argue both ways on that one, right?
But if they're keeping the client happy and everything, then that, you know. So
yeah, I completely agree. But I was really shocked when the thought was, nope, not taking this person. Nope, not taking this person because they were laid off. I'm like, wait, what? You're missing out on some really great people. There's some great people out in this market.
If they're the only person let go that week or that month, then yeah, that is probably a performance issue. But if they're part of like a bigger cut that's happening across the board, that's, you know, probably not performance related. Because performance should be dealt with as it happens, as you know, if you happen to have a person who's probably going to be put on a performance plan or something and you have to make some cuts, their name's probably going to, show up on that list. But I remember at, Clover, there was a case where they were letting some people go and, they just had to let people go. Like it was just, I've got to let 10 people go from this team and I only have 20 or whatever the case may be. And so you're going to let people go who you wouldn't normally want to let go, So,
yeah, I've had some, if I think back over the years, the last 25 years, whatever it is, the first time I ever had to lay people off and I didn't know the impact of this was when I was with Golden Lion. It was the big company. It was the last one that I was at and I was a part of. And I'm in my probably, I don't know, 25, 26, somewhere in there. I'm pretty young, right? I'm pretty young, have the boys. I'm working at Golden Lion. And we had to change a show that we had. And there was the monorail. I probably just gave away who it was. But anyways, there's the monorail.
Right.
So with the monorail, they were taking it out.
I don't even know if they still have.
They do not. They do not. So it was the shutdown of that. And then there was a shutdown of, there was this where you would go and take pictures with a couple of the animals. I won't say.
Oh, yeah.
A lion, a little cub lion. Right.
Yeah.
That was getting shut down.
Yeah.
I did. I did. That was getting shut down. And then a show was being put in. So that was good, right? There was a show that was coming in. It was a Cirque show. And then there was the changeover of restaurants that were happening at the same time. So what happened is they had contracted out restaurants to an external, let's call it a vendor. And they were bringing the restaurants back in-house where they were hiring their own chefs and sommeliers and servers. And there was also a new nightclub coming in. So you have a lot of these dynamics that were happening at the same time. I think that year might have been, it was thousands of people that needed to be hired.
I would say that's a lot of stuff going on.
Redirected. It was a lot, right? And I'm in employment, as we call it at the time. So we go into this big room and they were changing. I forgot. How could I? They were changing from a slot attendant to a slot coordinator, which was apparently a completely different role. It was very similar, but you had the things where people were in their jobs for a very long
Right.
time.
They could,
Right. So they were trying to make these changes and saying, we're going to this system. You have to be computer literate. You have to be able to learn these systems and things like that. So we had all of these things going on at the same time. It was insane. It was insane, all of these changes. And I remember,
on it one time.
yes. So for like these different segments, these are big populations of people when you think about hotel casinos and how many people they employ and things. And this was this was a big one. This was, it's on the strip. It was a big one. So called all these people into a room and told them that they were no longer had a job, essentially. Right. And I'm there on behalf of
Did they
employment.
get
So
like notice, or was it literally like, today's your last day?
It wasn't today was your last day. There was some notice that was in there. It was maybe a couple weeks or things like that, for everything to be changed out. But you have to have a certain length of notification also, because some of this was union. So the union puts in guidelines to say, right, you have to notify, you have to give X notice and things like that. So you pull them all to the room. HR is with me. I'm in employment, but I also have to help make this announcement and be the person that they come to help find another job, ideally find another role, one of the sister properties, something. And I did not understand really, because I was so young. This was, like I said, I wasn't in the industry for that long, maybe, 5 years at this time, things like that. But this was huge. There was a lot of things happening. And all I kept thinking is, how do I help people that now they know they just are losing their job, find another job within the properties, because a lot of the other properties were going through the same thing. So you couldn't do the same job transfer. This was a whole new. No, this was after. This was after that. It's
probably a lot of changes after that, but
yeah, because then I moved. I was for 9/11. I remember I was at the very first property. Because I remember turning on the TV, seeing this happen, and I'm like, this really can't be happening, or it's maybe not as significant as I am thinking it is. Like it wasn't registering. I think a lot of people had this thing with 9/11 where it just wasn't really registering, right? Like the significance of what was happening. So I remember going into work. I remember it being the very first property, sitting at my desk, and Carol had on her TV, and we were kind of watching what was happening and listening to what was happening from her
Carol
TV.
to have the TV going.
Good old Carol. I would walk it every morning. I'm going to sidetrack.
I just love
would walk every morning. Carol would be sitting at her desk, paying her bills, writing out her checkbooks, every single morning. And I got in trouble for being just a little bit late. And I'm like, well, Carol sits there and pays her bills for like the first 45 minutes of the day. Why do I get in trouble for being 5 minutes late?
Right.
Dropping off 2 kids. I'm not sitting here paying bills.
How many bills does Carol?
I loved her.
Sitting there paying her bills every day.
How many bills do you have, Carol? But she would always be like, readers on at her desk, paying her bills first thing in the morning. She's not there so early. She was far.
Carol. It is just so Carol.
Yeah. So anyways, I don't realize the impact of this, and like, how do we find everybody a job, and how do you get people to be employed, and look at that. It was a huge coordination effort, but the impact of that, they were all really good people. They did their job for years. They were employed. They were not the bottom. It was just a business change, right? You had the business necessity or the business need changed, and it was in all of these areas at one time. So if you probably go and pull up the numbers from way back then, it was 1,000 or so people that were impacted. So when I look at that and I see someone who has maybe been let go or laid off or whatever the case may be during those times, I never assume underperformance. That's the furthest thing from my mind.
No, because, you look at what was going on in the world at that time. I was laid off when COVID hit, and the company I worked at their biggest client was a hotel chain, and those were just absolutely destroyed with COVID. So they had to let a lot of people go. So stuff happens, especially when it's not union, or like all the unions around autos and things like that have been impacted as things are offshored or they're brought back on shore or whatever. Like all the car manufacturers, they stop making a particular line of car, and that can affect a lot of jobs too,
Yeah.
Like I saw people were talking about like the fact that they had the Grammys last week, not this last weekend, but before. And and that's in Los Angeles that had all the fires and things. And some people were saying, some of the celebrities were like, oh, we shouldn't have the Grammys because or now, the Oscars coming up because, the fires and everything. And it's like, I worked, in fact, I worked for a company that was in the entertainment industry that did productions. They were kind of the behind the scenes production for a lot of really big events. And one of the biggest events they did was a party around the Oscars. It happened every
Mm.
year. It was a huge production, and they were one of the vendors that was used. And when they put on events like that, the scale is so huge. You have no idea because there's parties going on. So there's like catering, and there's cleanup crews that come in for that, and there's lighting, and there's all that stuff. Travel, getting people back and forth from the hotel to the airport to the events. There's there's hair and makeup. There's so many things that are involved with a production that may only be 2 or 3 hours, but the scale around that is so huge that if you suddenly are like, well, we're not going to do that now, the amount of businesses and jobs that would be impacted by that is huge. Because a lot of times,
Yeah.
this company that I work for, they would usually get like one of their biggest clients they had that they partnered with, they lost after 9/11. And so they did some things for the Olympics that year, which was like saved them. But they kept that kind of thing was happening post 9/11 because a lot of events just weren't happening and things like that. So I'm like, they have to have these events because people need to be able to get back to some sense of normalcy. And there's so many jobs that are tied to that if they work for a company that is going to get paid once that event is through, they're not going to get paid now. So they're going to let all those people go. It's
Right.
unbelievable how big in scope that is for something that is a one-off event that happens once a year for a couple of hours,
Yeah.
So
And the prep work for it. I
yeah,
mean, once you cancel the contract, right? Or I know there's, cancellations of contract, but when you think about the independent workers
right.
that
The other
work that
company may
event
get,
and are
they don't
doing,
have,
whatever it is, or
yeah,
stylists or hair,
right.
setting up or whatever it might be, that's a whole day gone. And that company that holds that contract, the cancellation contract, typically isn't going to pay the workers. I mean, from what I've seen, I don't know if you've seen anything different,
Well,
but
no, I mean, like for
typically,
me specifically, I worked in the office, and I supported this production company, and I did, all the office managerial stuff. But there was one year that I worked an event because I was like, I really want to work one of these events because all the celebrities and blah blah blah, and I did see a lot of celebrities. It was very cool, but it, the things like, we hired lighting people, we hired sound people, and these were all separate companies. But the company who produced it had to get all these, get them set up, get coordinated, and then we rented the security earpieces and
mhm.
all of that. So we rented those from another company. So like the company, they weren't there, but we rented that equipment from them. And then afterwards, there's usually like video and stuff that has to be produced to, to send out to, there's so many sort of behind the scenes things that happen that unless you are a part of it, you have no idea that
Yeah.
is what's going on. And that's by design. Like you don't want to, you shouldn't be able to see it, but I remember this particular event that I went to, I worked like in the afternoon, like handing out the security earpieces and stuff and doing some coordination. And then once my shift was over, I got to go into the party. But before the party started, there was like a viewing of the Oscars. And so people were sitting, eating dinner. And then as soon as the
Mm.
dinner was over, everybody like stood up and moved into this other area that was going to be like where the music was happening. And all of these cleanup crew came in and cleaned up the whole area. And within like 30 minutes, they were gone. Like so this was this whole coordinated effort. And then they could open the tent up and everybody could then circulate throughout the whole thing. But there's bartenders, there's, security people, there's cleanup, there's, bathrooms, even the tents that are set up to hold the event are like in a parking lot. Like So it's kind of crazy, and then there's ballet, like it's just so much.
Yeah. When you think about like everything that comes into putting something on,
Right.
like there is an endless amount of people a lot of times. And as soon as you cancel that event, you stop doing it, right? It impacts so many people just
Right.
across the board. Like
Right.
even the tipped people, when you think about the bartenders, right? They might be getting an hourly, but they're
Right.
counting on the tip for the event or whatever the case may be. So when you think about those types of things, there's so many factors that come into
Yeah.
play, whether it's
Same on a
an
big
event that's being
with
canceled, a company downsizing. There's just so much pouring into that, I feel like.
right. And even on a company, on a for a company where you are working every day, it's not an event. There's so many people behind the scenes who are doing different things that you don't ever think about. Like if they're in an office, do you have gardeners and do you have maintenance and the cleaning crew, all those things that come into play. So some of the
Yeah.
reason too why companies want people to go work in an office is because they've got these properties that they purchased or they're in, 10-year contracts with that are now sitting empty. And they're like, well, we need to get people back in here because we're paying for all this. We're paying for the
Yeah.
electricity and the maintenance and the security and all of that as well.
Yeah. I think about that a lot because, you see such a varying opinions on return to office and going back into the office. I worked remote for the last, I
Yeah.
don't know how long. Since Orbital, I have worked remote. So that's a really long time. And there were a lot of other jobs that did not work remote. But one of the big thing was the office space and getting rid of that in Vegas and owns by McCarran Airport for Orbital for that small part of the business. And it was a pretty big lease that they had. So
Mhm.
once they wanted to get out of that lease, we all went to work remote as recruiters. So back at Orbital. But then when I think about the buildings where you're spending your dollars on, you have leased, or maybe you even own things of that nature. And then we were in this
Like
unique
Elmer, they
environment.
that big building. Yeah.
Yeah, in 2020. And then even Richard's job now that he's working, they want people to come back to the office. They had this, schedule where most people were working outside of the office, but they're still in the area. They didn't hire out of the area. And they're like, now you have to come back into the office because they're also seeing, which I think in some cases, some people are really great at working from home, but some people are really not great at working. You have a dynamic there.
Have to
Whether
understand.
people want to admit it or not.
I
Some
always
people
tell
are
people, I'm
great
like,
at it. Some people aren't.
not for everybody.
It isn't. It isn't. Like, it's not you're, doing the laundry, doing the, like, hanging out. It is. I feel like I work more remotely
Oh yeah.
than I do if
I
I
would
would
just
go
go
into an
at
office because I would unplug.
first
Yeah.
couple of months I worked remote. I was exhausted because I was like,
Yeah.
I've got to be checking email every second and answering every call, and because you
Yeah.
feel like you
And you
need.
feel like you have to be online to be accessible because you don't want someone to get the impression that
Right.
you're not working or you're not available, you're not there. So I even, I freak out a little bit. Oh gosh, did I see that Slack message or the Teams message, whatever system you might be on?
Right.
Did I see these things or did I respond? Do I have to respond to everything? Probably not, So some things now I'm a little bit better about, but they saw a drop in their work product,
Mm.
customer service calls. There was this one incident where someone was screaming at someone from home over the phone and the customer called and said, I think someone needs to go do a wellness check on this person because they were at home.
So it was like an abuse
It didn't sound like a good environment was going on back there.
and not like a
So
kid
they said
talking
that
to a
too.
parent or something. Wow, that's scary. Well, and
Yeah.
that can be the case too. Like people can
Right.
be maybe, if they were in an office, they could talk to somebody about what's going on, and but because they're working from home, they can't. You know, I
Yeah.
never thought about that, but that's definitely an issue.
It's true. I've been on with someone who was on my team and their significant other came home and was just lambasting. Like, I was in shock and they were so embarrassed. They were like, I have to go. And I'm like, please go do what you need to do, but let me know that you're safe. That's what I cared about. So there's so many dynamics that come
Yeah,
into play too.
yeah.
One from the real estate, when you think about people going back into the office and a company that was set up originally to be an in-office company and in-office culture, you really can't. I mean, you can buck the system all you want, but it's do you want to work there or not? And then go find a company that's willing to hire you remote. But then also when some companies have people that are remote, they're not seeing the work product or performance type that they need. They will pull people back into the office to be hybrid or whatever that looks like. So there's varying reasons, I feel like, for that. And it's the company's call. They're the ones, who need to report out to the shareholders and
right.
make sure they're making a profit.
And a lot of times, like I said, there's just other reasons why they want to do it. It could be just because I remember when COVID hit, I think it might have been REI, had recently opened a new office in the Seattle area where they're based. And they kind of made a decision, like, we're just not going to have that anymore. And they got rid of it and just told all their employees to work from home. But I think, that was unique for them and it worked. But not every company can do that or will do that. And if you have a culture of, we need to have people in the office, because it really is very different. If you work from home and your entire team at the rest of your, and I've been in that situation where everybody else I worked with was in an office, it can be difficult if the team isn't kind of cooperative with that. Because there was times when, we would have a team call and they were all in a conference room and I'm the one being dialed in. And so you don't necessarily know, what people are saying on the side or people rolling their eyes because you said something, on a call. So you have to be kind of confident in yourself that you can kind of overcome any potential feelings about that. And then you have to have a trust level too. And I had met everybody who was on the team in person. So I kind of felt like I knew them, and I usually would meet with people one-on-one within the team too. So I kind of built up a relationship with everyone, but that was unusual. That's not as common,
Yeah.
And what I did was very specific and it was different from everybody else. So I kind of felt like I had a voice because it wasn't like there was 3 or 4 other people doing the same thing who sat in an office. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it really
Yeah.
just depends on the situation and if it's going to work.
When I worked in situations where it was I'll call it hybrid, because we had in-office positions and then we had remote people. We had both.
Right.
I love going into those office locations to sit with people, to meet them, to do the face-to-face, to build a relationship and things like that, because it was a mix and I was always traveling everywhere. I was all around. I was not sitting still hardly ever,
You
but
calling me
you go
like,
to those
hey, I'm
places.
and such. Can you do this for me or whatever?
Yeah. If you're doing that, I think sometimes it doesn't make sense, because there was one company that they wanted me to relocate. And I did, essentially. I relocated. But I was never in that office anyways, because I was always at our other offices or at our clients. So it really didn't make much sense for me to have a home base at that office. It would have been better to fly in for the financial meetings that we needed to have in person. It would have been better if I would just flow in for those different occasions versus having to say, yes, I have a place in this city, in this vicinity. Because 90% of the time, I was either at one of our other offices where we had a large team there, or I was at a client.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't make, or at an event or something like that. It just didn't make much sense. But yeah, I think that return to work or the return to office has been still this hot topic. And I see, like, you got to trust people. You leave them alone. You let them work at home. That may or may not work for some people. But then you just, as an employee, you have to decide, where do you want to work and what environment you want to be in? And is that for you or is it not for you? And what does that look like? Because the company is going to make their own decision of what they want it to look like.
In today's world, if you work remote and a lot of people you work with work in an office, it probably isn't going to be too much of a shock if people are let go because they aren't able to move. Like, they either won't go into an office or they don't live geographically close to one. And unless the company's like, hey, we want to keep you on and we'll pay to relocate you, they're going to, maybe have to let you go or something if that's going to become a mandate too.
Yeah.
So, I remember that happening, in the last couple of years where they reopened offices in different places and we need people who can live and work in the same area. So do you want to relocate or,
Yeah. And I think when you make the decision, or a company makes that decision, they have to know they're going to lose some good high performers. When you think about it, think about an auto company that moved from California, 'cause we were trying to recruit out of there
I
when we
remember.
were at.
I'm staffing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we had a whole plan like, oh, they're moving this headquarters. Great. Let's try to get the people
right. And that was
into
a
this
huge.
other location. If they're going to make a decision to move, they
When I
might as well
lived
have
in
a
Southern
choice.
California, I worked very close to that, and that was a huge
Mhm.
facility with a lot of people. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, we had a whole operation around that. But we knew because they were going to relocate that corporate office. We're like, well, if they have to move, maybe they'd want to move to this location versus that location because there's some other benefits. There was lower taxes, I think, in the location that we were in.
yeah.
Cost of living, the housing
Well,
was
yeah.
lower.
In that area of Los Angeles County, it was very expensive. A lot of traffic.
Hmm.
If you were a single person or maybe a young couple or whatever, like you didn't have kids in school or whatever your situation was, you might be like, yeah, I could go there, that would work. And, you had some time to make that happen too.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
it
that's
wasn't
so
like,
true.
announced and they were going to be there next week. It was like more like almost 2 years, I think was the process, wasn't it? Because I remember when I started working with them, it was like a year out, but people were
Yeah, it
starting
was
to
18 months. I think it was 18 months was the total time frame. And then you had like based on what they were doing in their role, how
right,
they would come over to the new location or if they would come over to the new location.
right. And they had to build the facility too. I mean, and
Yeah.
then, but they built like schools and houses around it because it was so huge that, and it was
Yeah.
in sort of an unincorporated area. And so they had to build a whole thing around it, which is crazy to think, but
Yeah.
you know,
If you go there now, you would not believe I was there where they built this facility. It might have been a year ago now, maybe a year and a half ago, if I'm thinking right. But there's so much around. It's fun. I was like, wow, this is really built up. And even where I was, that I had the place, I mean, there was so many more condos, houses, the
Starbucks,
schools, the population had changed, the traffic was getting yucky, all the things that go with it. Yeah.
yeah. And it's funny too, because a lot of people, I've thought about this because, you know, I mean, generationally, I think there's always been some sort of migration that's happened in the United States, whether it was people who came over to Ellis Island and then people who migrated because of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. And then after World War II, there was a huge amount of people who migrated west because of aviation and things like that. And my grandparents had lived in Texas. My dad was born in Texas. And after World War II, they migrated to California. And my grandfather was an electrician. And eventually they migrated to Southern California because he worked in one of the aviation and they lived really close, built this whole community there for people who were going to work at like Hughes Aircraft and I can't remember what the other one was, but Hughes was Howard Hughes, aviation that he had there.
Hmm.
So they built all these houses, and then my grandparents bought a brand new house that was built, and part of this huge community that they had to build the grocery stores, they had to build everything, the schools, and all of that. It was one of the very first planned communities in the United States, and so it was pretty normal, And I've met other older people, and they were like, after my brothers got back from World War II, we all moved out to Los Angeles because that's where the jobs were, and they just migrated, some of the family. And I think we see that today with people coming from other countries, and then maybe the rest of their family comes over time. But I think one thing I've noticed is that there seems to be more reluctance around doing that today, where people who've worked in like mining or automotive or whatever, and their family has been there for 50, 60, 70 years because that's where the jobs were at that time. But maybe the jobs aren't there now. And so there's this like, well, where's all the jobs? And they've shifted, they've moved, and there's some that stay around and whatever. I think it's such an
Hmm.
interesting because, like, in that example, that automotive company was there because that's where they started, but then they needed to have a bigger facility and wanted to get more people, and there was just no place to build there. I can imagine that place because I've seen it so many times, and it's right between like three freeways. And, you can get to it from anywhere, but you couldn't grow that facility anymore. There was no way. There's no land,
No.
So in order to be able to build a bigger facility, they had to move somewhere, So it's kind of interesting because I think maybe we'll start to see more of that where people migrating to other areas of the United States because they're building a big solar plant or building solar panels or building whatever, and
I think so, because when you think about like the auto industry and when they would come into the US and create a facility, like you think about they're in, I don't want to say wayward places, but they're in places that are far from population a lot of times, or there's a nearby city. Like if I think about Mississippi and where there's a facility there, right? And there's a couple facilities there. The closest is Jackson. And if you live in Jackson, chances are you worked at the facility before the plant. I mean,
Right.
everyone, they had to have, right?
That's
Because
what
based on
jobs are.
population,
Right.
based on how many people you need and things like that. And then the relocation that we would try to get to come in. And if we're supposed to be bringing jobs back, and creating more manufacturing facilities and doing those types of things, you're going to see the areas where it's a little bit more rural today will be the places that these companies come in and start to build. To your point, like when you think about, the solar plants and things of that nature, like where are those going to go? And you see the increase in jobs. I think manufacturing did go up by 3,000 in January of 2025. January.
But then
What month are we in, Danielle? Is it?
what is this? Where are we? Who are we?
I feel like we've already had 6 months in the beginning of 2025 already, but
No meaning anymore. That's for sure.
January 25, I want to say was 3,000 increase in manufacturing jobs. So we'll see if that continues
Dip
to
in the other
increase.
jobs, right? You were saying
Professional was down, and business services down 11,000, and then hospitality was down. I can't remember that number off the top of my head, but
it was what 143,000 jobs that were created in January, or
yeah, 43,000 jobs,
which is low. It was the lowest it's been in the last year or so.
I think it was when I was looking at the numbers after they were adjusted. There was a month in there. Don't quote me on this month. That was like 77,000. So it's not the lowest in the last year for sure.
Because I was visualizing the graph that I saw, and so it looked like it was the lowest, but I don't remember what the time frame I was looking at. It might have been over 2 years, but a lot of times those are corrected and readjusted. So it'll be interesting to see how that number changes, in the coming weeks, if it goes down even more or goes up. Hopefully it goes up, but yeah, that is interesting. I mean, January is kind of a weird month too, because
it is
of temporary seasonal jobs and then, people don't travel as much during that period of the year. So for hospitality, that makes sense. I'd have to look at the previous year. I
did write down a few of them. Let me look at them. So financial was up 7,000. Manufacturing is the 3,000. Transportation, 1.1 thousand. Retail is 34,000. That seems high for retail. I don't know where that's coming from. I got to dig into that.
That is high.
Health and education was up. And then your professional and business was down the 11,000. And then leisure and hospitality was down the 3,000 jobs. And then the unemployment was 4%. So in the projected was 170,000 jobs. But that unemployment rate, to me, it's getting on my nerves, because the way that we calculate that number is not accurate, because people come off of unemployment. You only have a certain runway to collect unemployment. And then once you come off, you still might be unemployed. So that number staying steady, what it says to me and what we're seeing in the jobs, that people are coming off, not collecting unemployment because they're not able to. And then you have new people coming on that are collecting that unemployment, because we're still seeing that return rate to job not increase as significantly as we need it to increase. So I don't think it's really a steady number. I think it's just steady how many people are collecting, but not steady how many people, because I'm still seeing on LinkedIn and places like that where people are not able to find jobs, find work, but you do see in the professional in business category, 11,000 down. And I didn't go through the previous months to say, okay, I want to do that for our next episode or when we talk about our analytics and predictions and things like that. But
Right.
when you look at that piece of it, I think that number has continually gone down. And that's why you're seeing the high unemployment rate there.
Yeah, I agree, because people could be on unemployment for 6 months and still unemployed 2 months later, and they're not being considered as part of that metric. And then,
Yeah, because Florida's 3 months.
and how many positions are
Three.
open, during this time? So they have the job creation, but there's how many jobs are open to compare, because if there's not as many jobs open, then, there's all of that area of like, and there's can be a mismatch, of skills too. If there's not a lot of
Yeah.
business jobs and professional jobs open, and that's low, and people aren't being accounted, it's very squishy in terms of how you interpret those numbers.
I'm
Sort of a
seeing
false
in business
positive.
development, like if you're in generating revenue, generating business, I feel like there's a lot of those roles out there that I'm seeing. I feel like I'm seeing more talent acquisition jobs, which is good. But I think about was it Workday that said they were eliminating
Like
jobs based on
jobs
the
or
AI?
Yeah, I was wondering about that, because I'm like, where are they implementing AI that it's going to have that big of an impact?
That's
You
what
know,
I was thinking.
and Meta's already said that they're going to lay off a bunch of people, and yeah, I mean, it's shocking, when you say like 11,000 people or whatever the case may be, and how is that? Where is that being implemented, and is that a sound decision?
Yeah, do
Because
you
there's a
think
lot
it's
of like,
is it a blame game right now when you think about like how organizations are staffed and how they are doing business today? Is there people who are, because when I think about Workday, we know that system. We know what Workday looks like. We know there's a lot of workflows and tasks that you have to complete. And we're 1,700 people clicking a button and they've just automated it now. I don't know
I don't know.
what that looks like, but I don't feel like there's 1,700 or whatever that number was. I could be quoting the wrong number. But when I think about AI and the efficiencies that it creates, unless you stop developing on the product in a certain way,
Bad idea.
right? Right. But is that where the 1,700's coming from? I need to read that a little bit more in depth and see if, they say where it is. But if you are developing your product, you're integrating, you're making sure that you have your swivel chair right in your recruiter workflows, because that system is a task-based system. You can sit there and task all day long as a recruiter,
Are they getting rid of all
making it more efficient, but you'd be making it more efficient for the end user, right? But do they have a bunch of people sitting on the back end that are manually doing information that they've now automated? So I'm really curious to see why
if
AI
it's
was cited for
efficiency
that
thing?
number of jobs.
Yeah, if they're eliminating people because there's efficiency, because that's what I'm saying. Like they said, because of AI. Well, where is that being implemented? I hope it's not that they're letting all their customer support people go or something like that. But I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting, because that is a lot. That is a lot of
Yeah.
people all at one time.
Or did they stop customizing their workflows so much by company? Because when you think about Workday, every installation
Customizable. Yeah.
is unique, essentially. You develop it
But
how
yeah,
you want
that
your
would be a very
company
good
to
business
run.
strategy. Like, why would you do
No.
that? Why would you suddenly say, "Oh, we just don't do that anymore"?
Yeah.
Because you're going to lose potential new customers, and you're probably not going to hold on to your existing customers
Yeah.
for very long, because if they can't customize it or change it for their business needs, eventually they're going to start looking for something else.
Well, unless they go to a unified solution. Like if you think about Workday and how many people have it installed, and you have to, for each one of those companies as a candidate and a job seeker, you have to have a Workday login for each single one of those,
And
however many companies are in Workday. And I always thought to myself, why can't you just have one profile sitting on Workday and then go in and parse the information? Because what information really differently in the talent acquisition process do you need how custom are you really, I guess is what I
Right.
think as a
No, I
candidate
agree.
looking.
You
I
should just
don't
make
know.
a Workday profile. I mean, that would be
Yeah.
amazing. If you could
Yes.
say apply with your Workday profile like you can with LinkedIn and say apply
Mm-hmm.
with LinkedIn, and then it's customized in the sense of this particular company needs this bit of information and
Yeah.
this one doesn't, or whatever. You know, because
Because
like even LinkedIn, it can remember things and it'll say, oh, now that you answered this question for this application, we'll just store it. And then, and then next time it comes up, we can auto populate it.
yeah, here's your information. And you can on Workday, there is an integration with LinkedIn Apply, so or LinkedIn, so you can say use my LinkedIn profile. But when I would go in and try to do that option, a lot of times it didn't hook
Yeah.
in or didn't parse or didn't.
Yeah.
There was like
We
some
still
sort
have
of
that.
data
And now that we've
connection
uploaded with your
issues there.
entire or your resume, we still want you to answer all these 35 questions.
Here's it parsed, but it's completely parsed without the
It's all
title,
wrong.
without the date. The information that you
They
have in the
put the
job
location
description
in your job
completely different and looks
or your
ugly.
job title in the company name. We didn't put any of the
So
dates. So I've got to go back and add all the dates. And yeah, it's
do you
mess.
click out? If you see a workday like maybe next time.
Maybe I'll come back to it. Probably not, but
Yeah, maybe I'll go back. But they did. I noticed that a lot of companies wiped away that front. It allowed you, or were trying to allow you. Hopefully, they have it fixed by now. But use that LinkedIn profile. But then when it would parse and go in, it was all discombobulated.
yeah,
Whatever they had
what they
burnt.
they should do. All companies should have the ability to not just save it to their career site, like just, okay, if you apply for this one job with this company that probably is only going to have your type of job come up every couple of years, sure, you can save your profile. Why not? But at the same time, is it very handy? No. But if you could go in and create a Workday profile, update it with your resume, all that kind of stuff, that would be huge. And for everyone, for Bullhorn, for Greenhouse, for whatever the system is that, you know, you're using.
I think front end user. Everyone, people can argue with me if they want to. I don't care. Your opinion's mine's mine. So Greenhouse is actually one of my favorites from a front end user
Mhm.
experience. Now, back ends are completely different. How you're working through that recruitment funnel, what's automated, what's not, the data you're collecting. Let's not talk about that. What I'm talking about is if you go into a job and you see Greenhouse, to me, it's an immediate like, gosh, this
Right?
is gonna be easy. It's a candidate.
It is. It's a lot better. Yeah.
It's so easy, right? Because it parses you put in your resume, it takes your information, and basically off you go.
And they're
You might
not
have to do one or
a
two more
sponsor.
things, but that's
Right?
not really. You don't even have to create a login.
Yeah. Workday, not a sponsor. Greenhouse, not a sponsor. Yeah.
That's right. Not sponsored, but just we're talking about end user experience from the front end. Workday, there's some improvements there that need to happen. And I believe they're making them, but back to the layoff point, if there's really 1,700 people being laid off there because of AI, those are not your bottom performers. They're just people that their jobs
Rid of a department or
were,
few departments.
made more efficient or whatever that looks like. And now they're looking. So those are probably some really good people to pick up. Don't look at it like they not
I mean,
working
it's
there, so they
negative.
must have been bottom. No.
It's a negative for the people who are impacted, but you shouldn't look at it as a negative that the person.
No, I don't think so at all. I think when you think about any layoff that happens into your like that narrative, right, that was pushed out there by certain companies to say we're getting rid of our bottom performers. Well, what does that mean? Because you're not giving the market what that looks like in your company. And your bottom performance might be someone else's top performance. You don't know based on the environment, the company, the metric, what that person
And if
was doing.
you, and to use the meta example, if they're getting away from having a team that moderates and deals with, quote unquote fake news or whatever the case may be, which they've said that that's what they're going to do, at least Mark Zuckerberg has said that, then I think you understand implicitly that there's going to be entire teams that are gone. So,
Yeah.
like if you're changing the way you're approaching your product, then obviously there's going to be entire teams wiped out. because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because your products, it looks different, right? And then they might be focused on, let's say it's, Gen AI versus data science AI. Those are different in my mind. They're different skill sets when you're looking for
Right.
someone to develop those different products. They may be specialized and work with different things and things of that nature. So if you're fundamentally shifting your business, whether it be in technology or your business strategy or whatever that looks like, and you need to make changes to your business, you're going to need to let this group go and bring on a group that looks a little bit different or has a different skill set. Has nothing to do with the performance of that previous group. That's just a business strategy and decision. And like I said, when you look at our industry, if you look at staffing, that we've been in for so long, it's not, sometimes it's about performance when you look at it, but the majority of the time it's about seniority and longevity or elimination of a role to combine, to your point, to say, if I get rid of this, I can fund 2 people here and I'm shifting this strategy. Or someone doesn't know, the other thing that I've seen too, is someone doesn't know the impact of that person and what they actually do every day. And they think, oh, I know what they do. And then they let that person go. They lay them off. They're like, oh, crap. I did not know what they did
And
and
sometimes
how they did
there's
it. Whoops.
politics that happen where maybe there's a manager who is threatened by somebody who works for them, and they can make some changes and they can justify it to their leadership that, oh, this person makes a lot of money, we can cover for them, but really there's some political motivation behind that. But I've seen a lot of people who I'm like, how are they still there? Well,
Me too. There's some
they've been there
amazing
for 30
people on the
years.
market right now.
And you look at the people that are still working, you're like, I mean, that person's really nice, but they're kind of an idiot, or, they,
Danielle.
I'm not naming names, but I'm just saying there's some very
Don't
sweet,
they?
they're like, they're really sweet, like golden retriever, maybe not the
Bless
brightest,
their heart.
but, bless their heart. Yeah. But they've been there for 30 years. And you think about that, like if you have to lay that person off, you've got to now pay them out for all of the years that they've been there. And depending on the payout structures, a lot of companies follow the package of like 2 weeks for every year you worked at a company. Imagine if you have a person who's worked for them for 30 years and you've got to pay them out 2 weeks for every year. You've got to pay them for a whole other year plus
Yeah.
some for that. So you might as well keep them, is what they're going to do, because they're still going to need other people to do that work. So from just a business perspective, they're like, well, it's cheaper to keep her. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it's way, like you're going to have to pay so much money for that person to leave that it doesn't even make any sense. As opposed to
Yeah.
somebody else who's been there 5 years, you're going to pay them for 10 weeks or whatever. Yeah. So there's a
See, and
lot.
that to me, like, I have such a hard time wrapping my brain around that because I'm a performance-based person. Like, I look at, and not necessarily in things like that. Like, what are you doing every day? How are you making an impact to the business? What is your responsibilities and role, right? And the companies that play chess, like this person isn't performing here, so I'm just going to move them here instead of dealing with the issue. I've
Right.
never really understood that. And I've seen, but I also think that's how companies become C- companies, D companies, because they're not dealing with the non-performance in people because of the longevity or because someone's really nice or whatever else. And they're not looking at what's the impact to the overall business. And they're just moving these chess pieces around or moving these, they're checkers. They're not playing chess. They're checker pieces.
Right.
They're moving them around versus saying this is the business impact that I need. This is what I need done. I need to make sure that people are being held accountable to performance or whatever that looks like. These leaders are not necessarily great at doing that. So let me just make the decisions for the business. I think, people are the most important thing in business, but also how people show up every day are the most important thing in
And
business.
if you lay people off who are high performers, but they don't have seniority or whatever, and you keep the people who've been there for a million years, or maybe you don't, maybe you just keep people because they don't get paid as much or whatever, or they live geographically closer to the office and they can show up every day, whereas somebody who's remote can't. If you do that, and those are how you're making your decisions instead of based on strategically what's best for your business, that is just really disheartening for people who are left behind, who are good performers, who
Yeah.
are like, they're like, you let them go? Why did you let them, like, where am I going to go if this person's gone? Or what kind of longevity am I going to have if this person, you know what I mean? Or the person like you were talking about earlier who, in suits had all of those, they may not have been highest performer, but they were a strategic role in how they were kind of the linchpin, if you will, of
Yeah.
keeping the business flowing because they had all the information or they could help people, they could do a lot of things. Whereas, they could have their iron in a lot of different fires, but they weren't necessarily just contributing only on their own, working isolated and hitting certain metrics. And I don't know that
Yeah.
companies are teaching their leaders how to do that as much anymore, or how to think strategically that way, to kind of think about, where do we need to be in 6 months? Where do we need to be in a year? Are you staffed for that? Are you staffed today? Or can you
Yeah.
train the people that you have? Do we need to add headcount? Whatever the case may be.
I always think when I think about making changes, and there's been a lot of businesses where I've had to restructure, reorg, bring to performance, do those types of things. I always think 30, 60, 90, short-term, long-term objectives. And what
Mhm.
does that look like? And using that example that you just had, I'm not going to name the company because everyone will know who, people who know us will know who this is. So it was for a company that it was going back to a in-office model, right? Bringing back in-office, and had to look at how do we actually do that. So we pulled the population to say, based on how we've hired over the last, and this was previous to me, over the last 2 years, we hired anyone in any location just because they had the experience that we needed, which is not a bad thing, not a bad thing at all. But now when you're trying to go back into office across the geography, it becomes a really hard problem to solve. And then you start to layer in the performance factor. Like, yes, I want to bring these people back into the office. They're not near an office, but if you remove and you choose these, let's say it's 10 people for this specific office, right? You choose these 10 people for this office because they're in geo. These other 5 that are supporting that location that are not in geo are the highest performers that you have. So how do you maintain satisfaction and performance? Bringing these back in, or saying we're just going to let these people go because they're not in geo. You have to bridge the gap. You have to do it strategically and mindfully and say, either you rip off the Band-Aid and you say our performance is going to suffer for the next, just call it 12 months. You might as well,
Right.
if you rip off the Band-Aid, right? Or so, based on how quickly are people able to get to speed, how quickly can you hire, how all of those things come into play. Or you do a slow move to say, all right, we're going to get into geo model at 60% by this date. We're going to be at 80% by this date, and we're going to be 90% by this date. And maybe we never get to that 100% because that's a strategic business decision, because this 10% is kicking tail and taking names.
Right.
And we're going to put them in this grouping that's going to help across all of our locations. So now we can kick butt across. And then when we have a low performer in an area, we plug in one of our proven high performers as we unplug that person because they're a low performer, and then you're able still to sustain the business. I think that is so far missed a lot of times, where
Right.
it's this person, this location, this is who we keep, X out the org chart, this is what it looks like, when it needs to be a real strategy when you're shifting your business, whether it's, return to office, return to geo, return to whatever that might be. If you getting rid of your high performers, you're just really shooting yourself in the foot.
Right.
You're killing your business.
Like, if you have somebody who's good, and they live in a different geo, can you redeploy them to a geo that's closer to their home? Maybe they can't go in every day, but maybe they'd be willing to go in once a week or twice a week or a couple times a month, whatever it may be. But they could learn that market and start transitioning there. And maybe they're a fill-in. They come in when somebody's on vacation or whatever. There needs to be more flexibility in that type of model to say, this person, and I remember when they were deploying that model to say, oh, we're always going to have some people who are working remote. We're always going to, and companies can't say if that's not really what they're planning to do. And I think that
Yeah.
can be lip service to say, to kind of keep people chilled about it. Like, well, what about me? I don't live close to an office. And maybe they're like, well, we're going to build one in 5 years. We're going to,
Mm-hmm.
our plan is that we're going to we've got to build up the customer base, but that's on our plan. Next year we're planning. So just hang tight and, we'll kind of cross that bridge when we get there. Or,
Yeah.
you support this location, but this one is open. Would you consider going in office here, or would you consider doing it periodically? Or like I said, if you need to cover for somebody who's on maternity leave or going on vacation or whatever, you can kind of be like a fill-in. You can be a floater, if you will. So I think being a little more flexible in how you're modeling things too is really important, because then I think people also then are going to be more willing to be flexible if they feel like you're trying to make it work for them. You know,
Yeah. I
they
always
do you in that way.
I struggle with the high performance. Find a home. You know what I mean? Like I always think in a restructure and things like that, unless you're completely you have to wipe the board clean, right? You have to rip off that Band-Aid and this is what it looks like. I remember looking at one of an org that someone presented to me and I was like, this person services this client. This person services this client. They're filling all the orders there. This doesn't make sense to me because what you're doing is you're keeping people who are lower performers and then you're removing your high performers. How are you going to sustain your business? What does that look like? How do you really bridge that? Let's make sure we find a home to sustain. You have to sustain at least at current levels, right? And it's a really strategic decision in a mindset, in the understanding of what's happening actually in performance down to the lowest levels to be able to maintain that. But a lot of times people think structure first, people second, which you should
Right.
think structure first, strategy second, people plugged into that strategy. I want to maintain performance. I want to make sure, people can come into the office, whatever days, but then I want to have this floater team or SWAT team or whatever you want to call it that comes in because I know these are my high performers that don't necessarily have a home. They kill it
Right.
every single day, every
Right.
single week, every single month, right? And without them, our business is going to go down by 15% in the number of fills that we have, which is when you're thinking about thousands and thousands and thousands of fills, that's huge.
It's a lot of money.
It's huge. That's huge to the bottom line.
Yeah. So I feel like companies, and I know it's difficult for companies to talk about it and to sort of be transparent in that way. But I think companies need to figure out a way to be more transparent, because I think when you don't say things, then that's how rumors get started. That's how people get antsy and start asking questions that companies aren't prepared to answer. So I think you have to be they need to be as transparent as possible to say, yes, we're opening up branches. No, we don't know where all the branches are going to be yet. But, as soon as we know, we'll make it because if they know they're going to open a branch in 6 months, why not make that information available to say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, because, people move all the time. Maybe somebody's going to relocate naturally because they have kids who are going to go into school. So they're looking for a new school district or whatever. If you tell your team, we're going to open up a branch over here, so we're probably going to be looking for people in that location, raise your hand if you're interested in that. You don't have to commit today, but you know what I mean? Like, just sort of involve them in the conversation. And I think that's what families do. And so many companies, say they're a family, but they're not being transparent about what they're doing, right? So I think, and saying like, okay, well, we are going to want most people to be in an office. If you're not near an office now, but you're thinking of relocating, let us know if you want to do that. Or, maybe we can make something work where you're not in an office. Like, there
Yeah.
just has to be more flexibility and more discussion with people about
Yeah.
that.
Hey, is anyone willing to relocate to this location or whatever it
Yeah.
looks like, right? We don't have anyone for this. Are you willing to? You have people who too also who are willing to go and stay in a location for a few months, to get the business off the ground and do whatever. It comes down to communication strategy. What do you need it to look like? Do you need to sustain and maintain your current production levels is what I'll call it. And then, having that information available is as you know it, because a lot of times, sometimes the planning isn't so great. And it's like, where are all these things? How many? And so where are they? And they're like, oh, I don't know yet. We think. And I'm like, well, all right. So you
Well,
can't
and
really plan
sometimes
around
there's not even
the
like a
thing.
list of all the locations. Like, you know, I remember going, where do we even have offices? Oh, well, that list is old because we're trying to get out of those leases or whatever. You know, like somebody needs to have more, you know, it needs to be more transparent. They're on
Yeah.
a lot of levels, because if you have people who are, you know, single and they're willing to move somewhere else, or maybe they're engaged and their, you know, future spouse is, you know, living in another location and they have a long, there's so many things about people's lives that you don't necessarily know or can anticipate, that if you let people know, they may not today go, yeah, I want to move to that location, but maybe it kind of puts an idea in their head and they're like, you know what, maybe I would want to live there, you know, and maybe I'll look at that. And so, yeah, we need to do better with that.
Agree. I think in summation, what we want to say is don't assume because someone's laid off. There's some really, really, really amazing people in the market right now that I also, Danielle, I don't understand how they not have landed. Like, how are they still out there? I don't even, I wish I had a huge company. I could just hire everybody that I know is amazing out there, but I don't have that. So,
We were
but yeah,
independently
there's
wealthy.
some amazing people out there. Don't assume just because someone laid off, they were a bottom, because I know some truly great and amazing people that are out there right now that have been looking for a while, like a pretty long time. And be smart about your strategy when you think about whatever you have to do, whether it's return to office, return to work. How do you maintain your performance? What does that look like? How do you bridge people over? And then maybe eventually you say, no, everyone has to be in the office, and then you sunset that. But you can do that with communication. That's fairly easy, I feel like. And if
Right.
someone's on board with it, they are. And if they're not, they're not. Like, but all you can do is have the conversation.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Do you want to stop there?
Yeah, I think that's
All right. We'll say like, follow, share. We're on all your favorite listening channels. This episode has been sponsored by socialjobs.com. So check them out. Anything else to add, Danielle?
that's it. Yeah. Like, follow, subscribe, share with anyone who you think might enjoy this. And we have a link in the show notes to buy us coffee if you like.
All right. Thanks. Until next time. Bye.